I'll read to you a letter that my family received in 1944. Why must your race move into white sections? There are many districts in LA where colored people are welcome. Would it not be more conducive to their happiness to live amongst their own?
Los Angeles is one of the most well-known cities in the world. As a cultural, financial, and commercial center of Southern California, Los Angeles is the second largest city in the United States with a population of 4 million. With its beautiful beaches, almost perfect weather, and unsurpassed entertainment industry, the city has long been considered the quintessential land of opportunity for those seeking fame, fortune, and even fresh starts. A hallmark of Los Angeles is its racial and ethnic diversity. The international diversity of the city is showcased in its neighborhoods: Little Tokyo in Chinatown near the city's center, Little Ethiopia in the Mid-Wilshire district, Little Armenia in East Hollywood, and large Latin American communities in East LA, Southgate, and MacArthur Park. The historic area of Leimert Park near Crenshaw Boulevard reflects the richness of African American culture. This diversity is not surprising, considering that the founding settlers were of mixed-race people originating from the Mexican provinces of Sinaloa and Sonora. Felipe de Neve, the first Spanish governor of California, recruited 11 families from these Mexican provinces. Of the 44 pobladores, 26 were of African descent, 16 were Indian, and 2 were European.
One of the reasons why you have a high number of Afro-Hispanics in that group is because Spain also had what they call the caste system. And that system, really based on your status, told you everything from what jobs you could have, what clothes you could wear, right down to the jewelry that you could wear. So these people looking for new opportunity were the most, most likely to sign on to the expedition. Imagine that you've been the landed gentry, you're at the tip of the spear in your community. You know, your relatives have been the mayor, governor, things like that, and then overnight everything changes. The language changes, the laws change. You have an influx of people who despise you. Now, instead of, keep in mind there was no black consciousness movement for these people. So most of the landed gentry, the Californios, they leaned towards, and they modeled themselves after European nobility. The whole idea between 1850 and 1880 was to take the land away. I mean, look today. Very few of the original grantees of these huge land grants actually own their land today. One of the few exceptions is the Dominguez family, which Manuel Dominguez insisted that his daughter marry white men in order to keep the land intact. And for the most part, it worked. Gets under my skin when I hear people say, well, Pio Pico just mismanaged his money and gambled his fortune away. He was a millionaire by anybody's standard for that time, so he did live well. But he did not gamble all of his money away, or did he mismanage it to that degree. He was swindled. He was taken advantage of by a racially biased court system.
During Spanish and Mexican rule, individuals of African and mulatto heritage held prominent government positions. Pio Pico, the last governor of California under Mexican rule, was a large landowner and businessman who achieved great success in real estate and opened a lavish hotel near the plaza. The Pico House still stands at the plaza today. After California was admitted to the Union as a free state in 1850, some of the most influential black pioneers emerged. Former slave by the name of John Ballard moved to California from Kentucky in 1859 and settled in Agora Hills near the Santa Monica Mountains. This area was commonly referred to as Niggerhead Mountain and later Negro Head Mountain. Bridget Mason was born a slave in Mississippi in 1818. Mason and her daughters eventually traveled to San Bernardino, California, with their master in 1851 as he sought to join a Mormon outpost. But when Mason's master was preparing to sell them in Texas, a slave state, she petitioned for her freedom in the California courts and won. Mason and her daughters settled in Los Angeles. She worked as a nurse, midwife, and herbalist. Saving her money, Mason became one of the first African Americans to purchase land. Through her real estate investments, Bridget Mason had amassed a fortune worth $300,000 at the time of her death in 1891. Mason taught her children and grandchildren the value of owning property.
Eventually, when the railroad comes in, that's when you start really seeing black communities.
The expansion of the Santa Fe Railroad dropped the rates and made it cheaper for people to migrate to Los Angeles. Because of this and the widespread promotion of a beautiful, attainable life that included owning land, the city was booming with people. As a matter of fact, John J. Nemours, owner of the California Owl newspaper, stated around the turn of the century,
"This new country not only attracted Negroes, but also people from all parts of the globe, seeking a new life of freedom and dignity who poured into California. It was this intermingling of cultures that was to give color and glamour to the future land of the California West."
Between the 1890s and 1910, large groups of Black Americans migrated to Los Angeles from the South to escape racial violence and bigotry. Black migrants frequently settled near the railway stations in downtown Los Angeles, in particular around Central Avenue. By 1900, there were 2,131 African Americans living in the city. They had become the second largest population of Black people in California. Despite hardships, they found jobs in the transportation industry and manufacturing as waiters, porters, laborers, domestic servants, and janitors. Buying homes in Los Angeles wasn't easy but less difficult than in other cities. There was more space to build, so property prices were lower, and African Americans, like other Americans, took advantage of the opportunity. But in the California Eagle newspaper, James B. Loving mentions how he foresaw segregation and property restrictions as a menace to the Negro's health, culture, safety, and economic advancement.
The racism was very blatant. It's a white man's neighborhood. That's how these tracts were sold. So this was the reason why you saw restrictive covenants, things of this nature. It was to go along with that California myth that this was the new white utopia.
White families believed that integration with Blacks would bring down their property values and could lead to intermingling and intermarriage, so they developed and instituted strategies to prohibit Black people from purchasing homes in their neighborhoods. Violence and vandalism occurred by individuals and groups such as the Ku Klux Klan.
I remember when they said you can't go behind the orange curtain. There was a reason for that, because there was the Klan was in Orange County and in Riverside County. And they would literally come into California and want to take the land. They just wanted to take the land, just as they had done to the Indians.
In 1924, an early case of Klan activity against Black ownership of property occurred. The Klan attempted to terrorize the Black owners of Bruce's Beach into selling their resort in Manhattan Beach. Mr. and Mrs. Bruce purchased their property in 1911 and had established a popular place well known for picnics, parties, and other leisure activities near the water. When they refused to be intimidated by the Klan, the city council stepped in, condemned the property, and forced the Bruces to sell. In 2006, the city of Manhattan Beach acknowledged its travesty of justice by renaming a park Bruce's Beach in the area that the resort was once situated. Other tactics used to discriminate in housing were practiced by insurance companies and financial institutions. They redlined neighborhoods and refused to lend money to African Americans for mortgages. And another widespread tactic was racially restrictive housing covenants. These were agreements between white homeowners and real estate companies to exclude non-Caucasians and other alien races from purchasing in certain neighborhoods. Thus, housing discrimination not only impacted African Americans, but also Jews, Mexicans, Chinese, Japanese, and immigrants from Eastern Europe. Many families from those groups settled on the east side of Los Angeles, alongside African Americans.
As you had black people who were moving south on Central Avenue, they were not moving into new housing stock, okay? These houses were already older. So you couldn't get the money from a bank like like most people do today and refinance and fix up your home. If you didn't have the skills to do it yourself, your home fell into disrepair. So you had the makings of a slum-like situation because you couldn't get a hold of the capital even if you had equity in your home, they're not lending to you. Liberty Savings in the 20s, Broadway Federal in the 40s tried to take up that slack. That's what redlining was about.
These excluded groups did not sit by and allow restrictive housing covenants to determine their future without fighting back. They organized and filed cases to prohibit the practice. The California Supreme Court ruled in Los Angeles Investment Company versus Gary that it was not legal to restrict sales of property based on race. This essentially meant that minorities could purchase a property but not live there. Then, in 1926, in Corrigan versus Buckley, the Supreme Court ruled that racially restrictive housing covenants could be enforced and refused to review cases challenging the decision for the next 20 years.
As you know, Nat Cole had Mayor Bradley. They would get people to buy properties in the name of whoever and then transfer over. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that was done in Leimert and in Baldwin Hills. So that was another way, not just striking down the covenants and restrictions, but coming in using a proxy person to purchase and then transfer that property over to an African American, or in some cases, Hispanics or Latinos as well.
During the 1930s, African Americans began to purchase homes in the West Adams district, an area of affluent white residents. Beautiful Victorian mansions and craftsman homes built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were appealing to the wealthy class and those with higher incomes. Norman O. Houston, a founder of the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company, became the first African American to purchase a home in the Sugar Hill district of West Adams. Hattie McDaniel, the first African American recipient of an Academy Award, lived in the West Adams area as well.
Are you aware of the antagonism and resentment in your neighborhood against you? You might not feel so secure if you didn't have white tenants under you. This is just what causes racial prejudice and resentment and invites hatred and uprising. Are you being fair to your neighbors, and is it fair to your children, knowing they are unwelcome and resented by neighborhood children? Would it not be more conducive to their happiness to live amongst their own? You may enjoy a great satisfaction in getting in where you are unwanted and unwelcome in the neighborhood, but the surge of resentment against you is mounting. If that's what you want, it's yours. A white.
Lauren Miller was born in 1903. In Pender, Nebraska, Miller relocated to Los Angeles in the 1930s, where he was respected as a lawyer who represented more than 100 plaintiffs seeking to invalidate restrictive housing covenants. In 1945, Miller became the attorney who won restrictive covenant cases representing Hollywood stars Hattie McDaniel, Louise Beavers, Ethel Waters, and others who had moved to the affluent Sugar Hill section of Los Angeles. During World War II, African Americans migrated to Los Angeles from the South in unprecedented numbers to fill labor shortages, which strained the aging housing supply already occupied by blacks. Restrictive covenants forced people to live in deplorable conditions in an aging and overpopulated housing stock.
Veterans came back from the war and they couldn't get a GI loan. Tuskegee Airmen came back and couldn't get a GI loan. They couldn't get an FHA loan. They went and bought property to build their own tracks, to build their own community. No one would make them a loan.
As the Black community in Los Angeles expanded, they challenged extra legal barriers to residential mobility. The West Side, which was any section west of Main Street, was the most desirable part of town, but heavily segregated by white homeowners with restrictive covenants. On May 3, 1948, the United States Supreme Court rendered its landmark decision in Shelley v. Kramer, holding that the racially restrictive covenants cannot be enforced by courts since this would constitute state action. In Los Angeles, the Southwest Realty Board, a strong affiliate of the California Association of Realtors, formed committees to organize homeowners to maintain racial restrictions, denied African American real estate agents membership, prevented them from marketing properties in certain areas of the city, and even denied them access to open houses for viewing by their clients. In response to these racist practices, African American real estate agents in Los Angeles formed the Consolidated Realty Board in 1949 as a state chapter of the California Association of Real Estate Brokers. The organizations were founded because African Americans were denied membership in the National Association of Realtors.
I was going to join the real estate organizations, and that's when I went to Southwest Board, although they were in Beverly Hills at that time, to join. And that's when I was informed that I could not because I was a Negro at that time. And so they didn't allow Negroes to join the Realtor Board. That's when the fight started years later.
Members in this new organization created the trade name of Realtists to differentiate their members from realtors. In 1963, the Rumford Act ended racial discriminatory housing, but the following year, white realtors launched Proposition 14 in their quest to legalize discrimination again. By the time the Fair Housing Act was enacted, whites had already fled the inner cities for the suburbs. Government programs contributed heavily to the large-scale migration of whites from South Central Los Angeles in their crusade to create majority white areas, taking their tax dollars with them. Highways were constructed to transport people from jobs in the cities to newly developed residential communities in places such as Burbank, Culver City, and Glendale. African American neighborhoods including Leimert Park, View Park, and Baldwin Hills enriched Los Angeles with educational, cultural, and economic advancements. At the dawn of the 21st century, gentrification has created another demographic shift. As a result of rising housing costs in the suburbs, traffic congestion, and extended commute times, a new generation of white suburbanites are returning to the inner city enclaves that their parents and grandparents deserted a few generations ago. African American neighborhoods abandoned earlier have become attractive alternatives for white home buyers. Gentrification also extends to other areas where minorities reside, such as Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles, and Echo Park, having an economic and social impact on the residents in those areas. After winning the war against racist discriminatory real estate practices, the Consolidated Realty Board and its affiliates face a new battle in the 21st century. Prompted by irresistible financial propositions, inner city residents have sold their homes and relocated beyond the suburbs. Along with higher offers, wealthy white home buyers bring their own agents, squeezing out black real estate professionals who have built careers in the community. Although racial restrictive covenants no longer exist, the cultural and historic fabric of minority communities are being destroyed, and the real estate gains of the past diminished. The outcome of gentrification and economic disparity indicates these neighborhoods may indirectly return to their segregated roots.